Good afternoon, folks on the East Coast. Good morning, folks on the West Coast, and good evening, good nightish, folks in India, because we do have audiences in India also. Welcome to the Saturday noon hour, hosted by the US India Political Action Committee and the Imagine India Institute. My name is Robinder Sachdev. As you guys know, folks, our viewers often we pick up topics of interest and concern to the Indian American community every 2 weeks in this season. Last season one, we were picking up topics every week, but this season two, we are doing it on a bi-weekly basis of issues of interest to the Indian American community and the wider American society. And of course, sometimes those relate to US India relations also. But today's topic is something which is very much intrinsic, internal within America. And the topic of the day is violence and hatred against Asian Americans. We got a brilliant panel with us today, including two members of the US Congress, who will be sharing their views on the topic of the day. First and foremost, may I also invite with me my colleague and founder chairman of the US India Political Action Committee, Sanjay Puri. Sanjay, please.
Thank you, Robinder. It's a
Well,
real pleasure to be here today on such a very, very important topic. Um, the world is facing a lot of challenges, especially in the United States. We've seen a pandemic that has spiraled out of control. But as a consequence of that, we've seen a lot of actions or results that have impacted many different people, but especially the Asian American community. So I think it's a very relevant and important topic because this should be a teaching moment for all of us that when we face crisis, we come together, we don't lash out at each other. So I think you've got a great panel, so I look forward to that, Ravinder.
thank you, Sanjay. And without any ado, may I invite Congresswoman Judy Chu from the 27th Congressional District of California to join us in the studio, please.
Thank you so much, Robinder. I really appreciate your introduction. Yes, I am Congress Member Judy Chu, and as the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call CAPAC, I'm so grateful to the U.S. India Political Action Committee for hosting today's panel on violence towards the AAPI community. This has been an incredibly difficult year for all of us as our country has struggled with a dangerous pandemic, an economic recession, and historic grappling with issues of systemic racism, prejudice, and violence. And in the midst of all of this, America made history when we elected our first woman of color and our first Indian American Vice President, Kamala Harris. It would not have happened, though, without record turnout from the new AAPI voters in key states like Georgia, which shows why it's never been more important that the whole Asian American community be engaged in the process. That's why it means so much that for the past year, you have been hosting conversations like this to keep the Indian American community informed and involved. And I'm particularly grateful for today's conversation on the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. In March, our nation was shocked and horrified by the murder of 8 people in Georgia, including 6 Asian women. In response, I organized a congressional delegation to Atlanta to be with the AAPI community during this difficult time and meet with the victims' families. And we went there with a purpose: to follow the murderer's steps to show how deliberate he was in targeting 3 Asian-owned spas. Starting at the site of the first shooting, named Young's Asian Massage, we then drove 27 miles, as the shooter did, until we arrived at 2 more Asian spas that were next to each other, where he continued his murderous spree. Local sheriffs have tried to diminish these crimes by saying that the shooter had a sex addiction and a bad day. But he had plenty of other places to go to in those 27 miles. Instead, he chose 3 places where there would be no doubt that Asian women would be killed, and there is no doubt in my mind that these shootings were a hate crime. And I've written a letter to the Department of Justice urging them to investigate it as such. And just last month, tragedy struck the AAPI community again when a gunman in Indiana killed 8 people, including 4 Sikhs, at a FedEx facility where over 80% of the workforce was South Asian. This was the worst Sikh massacre in the US since the Oak Creek Gurdwara shooting in Wisconsin in 2012. And in all of these instances, the shooters' actions shouted hate when they targeted these locations. But these are not isolated incidents. The South Asian Muslim and Sikh communities faced alarming bigotry and discrimination in the aftermath of 9/11. And since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, there's been over 3,800 reported anti Asian hate crimes and incidents. They were fueled by Donald Trump's usage of the terms China virus and Kung flu, fanning the flames of xenophobia. And these attacks have gotten worse over the course of the pandemic, with increasingly violent assaults, some fatal, targeting older and more vulnerable Asian Americans. In fact, these anti Asian hate crimes have become almost a daily tragedy, leaving many Asian Americans wondering, will I be next? And that is why we in the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus have been taking action all year with press conferences, statements, letters, hearings, and legislation. And fortunately, we've gotten help from an important partner, President Biden. Within his first week in office, President Biden issued a presidential memorandum to address anti Asian hate that instructs the Department of Justice to work with the AAPI community in finding solutions to combating anti Asian hate and bias. And just a few weeks ago, the president invited me and other AAPI members to join him in the White House to discuss additional actions that he's taking to address anti Asian hate and keep our communities safe. Having the meeting with the president right in the Oval Office shows just how seriously he is taking this problem. And then another critically important thing happened last month, and that was when the Senate passed Senator Mazie Hirono and Congresswoman Grace Meng's COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. This bill would create a new position at the Department of Justice to help improve hate crime reporting, and it also includes the text of my bill, the No Hate Act, which will provide resources to state and local law enforcement to improve hate crimes reporting, tracking, and enforcement. The overwhelming 94-1 vote was an almost unheard of show of bipartisan support, showing dramatically that AAPIs are not alone in the fight against Asian hate. Because of this vote, we expect that in May, during Asian Pacific Heritage Month, this will pass out of the House and go to the president's desk to be signed into law. There are many steps we can take. But let me tell you what the most powerful one is. It is to come together, no matter our backgrounds, united in speaking out against hate and targeting any community and addressing systemic racism in our nation. That is why today's discussion means so much to me. We cannot do this alone. So thank you for hosting today's event and to all of you for taking part.
Thank you so much, Congressman Bachu. Some brilliant points you made. I don't know how much more time you have. If you have a couple of minutes, maybe my colleague Sanjay, would you have any comment or a question with the Congress member, please?
Well, I've worked with Congresswoman Chu early on when she came into the Congress, and she's really shown a tremendous leadership. But putting that aside, Congresswoman Chu, you made a very important point, which is when anybody in our community gets attacked, the community gets attacked, and I think we need to really think of it from that way. Whether it is Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, Sikh Americans, whatever it is, I think that is the important thing. But also, Congresswoman, we have seen three things come together, and we have a mental crisis in this country, we have a gun crisis in this country, and now we have a hate crisis. And all three have come together with this pandemic, and obviously we need to address all those things. But that's going to be into a longer discussion. But as a community that's listening to you right now, you said we need to put our differences together. You also said to vote and be engaged politically. Is there anything else that you would like to convey to the thousands and thousands of people who will be listening to you now as well as in the future that they can do?
Well, on a granular level, if you do know somebody who is the victim of a hate crime or incident, please tell them to report it. There are so many that have a fear of reporting, and we should encourage them to overcome that because we need to know what's going on, but also they need to know that they are not isolated. Secondly, it's important for people to help, and there are simple things that can be done, and you can learn those steps through bystander intervention training. There are many, many thousands that are taking this now, but we regular citizens can do something to stop all these acts of hatred. But on a larger level, like I said, the most powerful thing is for us to come together, to support one another. Because I tell you, when these terrible actions take place, it's not as though the perpetrators of these crimes can differentiate between different nations. Uh, in fact, they cannot differentiate between different Asian Americans. And we know that, unfortunately, those who've suffered have been nearly a majority actually have been people who are not Chinese Americans, even though President Trump was trying to target the Chinese. So we are in this together. And that's why it's so important for us to support one another. This is why I was so active. Actually, one of the first things I did when the Muslim ban took place was to go to the airport to try to free those who were being unfairly detained. But also, I introduced the No Ban Act. And I'm proud to say that just this last month, it did pass out of the House so that no president can do that again.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. May I also add, you met some of our panelists who are backstage right now. They are thought leaders in their own right, each one of them. So your message, as you said right now, which Sanjay requested you, I'm sure that your message would be, going via them also, in addition to our viewers and listeners, so that we can multiply, amplify the message and the leadership that you are suggesting and providing. Thank you so much. Sanjay, anything else? Congresswoman, please tell us if you have some time, or your convenience of time. Would you have another minute for a question, or?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Well,
Sanjay?
I think, as I said, the Senate passed the bill, Congressman, and now, the DOJ, as you said, if you see something, report it. I think that's a very, very important thing that's happening. And I think, political activism also becomes a key aspect of doing this, I think, Congressman, which is something that you've talked about. And we are doing our part in getting our people registered to vote, getting them out to the folks, etc., because that is now becoming so important, because we are seeing record numbers of people of color who are now in Congress or coming in. And I think that makes a big, big difference. Any thought on that, Congresswoman?
I was so proud of the Asian American Pacific Islander community in these November elections and in the Senate elections of Georgia. The Asian American Pacific Islander community came out in numbers unlike anything before. And in fact, in November, the early turnout of Asian Pacific Islander voters was 300% higher than it was in 2016 in the battleground states, which meant that I felt that Asian Americans definitely made the difference, especially in a place like Georgia, where the margin was so tight. In fact, 30,000 of those voters were new voters.
Yes.
Had not voted before and were engaged this time. So your work on the voter registration, that paid off. And it made the difference with the Senate elections in Georgia, which, as you know, were at the thinnest of margins. So this is why I like to say we, the AAPIs, have gone from being marginalized to the margin of victory. And everybody needs to know that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Judy Chu. And may I take this opportunity to also welcome Representative Raja Krishnamurthy from Illinois, the 8th Congressional District. Welcome, Congressmember, to the panel with us today. We are just concluding with Congresswoman Judy Chu. Sure, please. Yeah. As we mentioned, this is a live show, and we've been getting some live comments, and we had a comment from Steve Rao from North Carolina saying hello from North Carolina to Congresswoman Chu. Then we also had a mention from Naresh D. Bhakta. He seems to be knowing you. Maybe he's saying, "Hi, Judy. I'm from Ahoa, GLAA. Thank you,
Oh,
Naresh,
yes.
for your comments. Thank you, Steve. That's good to know that we have friends and friends of friends logging in, checking it out. Steve Rao was also asking, what can city leaders do? Thank you so much, Steve. As a Congress member was mentioning that, take the message that people have to be together, irrespective of, whichever communities have to come together in a way. We have also a comment from Hasumati Chudasma, who is saying, kudos for the Georgia turnout. Thank you very much, Hasumati, for your comments. Then we have another comment from Hasumati. She's saying, "Ooh, Krishnamurti Sahib." Well, thank you so much. It's a live show. We get comments, and that's the value of engagements and live interaction with our viewers and with our eminent panels. Thank you so much, Congress member, uh, for your thoughts and comments.
Thank you,
Thank
Congressman. Nice to have you. Thank you.
Bye, Judy.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Uh, Welcome, Congress member Raja Krishnamurthy, to the topic of the day. You have the topic which we are looking at, the issue of Asian American, hate and violence and hate crimes against the Asian American community. So, your opening thoughts and comments, please, on the topic of the day, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Robin. Thank you, Sanjay. And I want to say a special thank you to your panelists, Dr. Wang, Arti Kohli, Sean Singh Guman, and Dr. Pavan Dhingra. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. I'll try to observe the 3 rules of speaking: be short, be sweet, and be gone. And so I just have 3 comments that I want to make to you. First of all, I just want to say thank you for bringing attention to this incredibly important topic. And U.S. Impact is a very appropriate forum to discuss this, given its broad reach and all the people that it touches. So thank you for doing that. The second point is it's really very deeply disturbing what's obviously happening with the rise in hate. Basically, the rise in hate crimes has been 169% over just the past year, and that has been going up steadily over the past 5 years. Combined with what we call domestic violent extremism, driven largely by white nationalism, this is an issue that we have to be worried about. Whether you're Indian American, whether you're Asian American, whoever you are, you have to be concerned about it, because at the end of the day, America is really about tolerance, equality, love, acceptance, and it's about allowing people such as myself with 29 letters in my name to be in the United States Congress. And so we have to fight discrimination and bigotry and intolerance and prejudice and hate wherever it rears its ugly head, whether it's towards Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans, Hindu Americans, Sikh Americans, or anybody. It doesn't matter. We have to stand together. And that's why I'm so proud to be part of this panel. Now, what happened last month in Indianapolis, where 4 of our Sikh brothers and sisters were murdered in cold blood at the FedEx facility, only illustrates how the problem is a clear and present danger. It's a clear and present danger. And I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter your political affiliation. Unfortunately, there are people in this country who are uncomfortable to the point of doing violence to people who don't resemble them. And so we have to band together against that sentiment. As Congresswoman Chu said earlier, there have been legislative efforts, and there need to be more. I have introduced something called the Bipartisan Hate Crimes Commission Act, and that segues to my third point, which is this particular act would create a bipartisan commission of 12 members of both parties, Republicans and Democrats, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, not currently serving in office, who would study and report back within 1 year on ways to basically address the rise in hate crimes. It now has 150 co-sponsors. It's been endorsed by various groups, and it has bipartisan support. And I'm hopeful that we can actually get it passed out of the House and signed into law. But at the end of the day, what I would say is this. We need everybody to speak up, speak out, and make sure that you are heard on the issue of fighting hate. This is a very, very stressful time for everybody, especially during COVID. And so what we need to do is look out for our fellow neighbors, look out for our fellow community members, and make sure that we fight discrimination in all its forms.
Thank you so much, Congressmember, for your views. And especially, I'm struck by the third point, which you mentioned about that commission taking a long-term view, going, taking a deep dive and really, trying to ferret out some long-term, mid to long-term solutions to this issue at hand. Meanwhile, as you were talking, we did have some comments coming in. I'm reading out those comments for you. You need not kind of answer them. One was, the rise in hatred is related to political propaganda, or is it due to something else? Thank you so much. Another comment from Naresh Bhakta was saying, looking forward to seeing you both during our legislative summer in DC by our AHOA team. Thank you so much, Naresh. Comment from Hasumati was, it's terrible what's going on in the United States in terms of these horrendous hate crimes. Thank you so much. These are just unbearable. Thank you so much. Sanjay, would we have some thoughts or comments to maybe request from Congressmember?
Well, just comments. I know Congressman has got a tight schedule, so I don't want to really take. But he's been at the forefront of pushing on a lot of these things, and really appreciate what you are doing, Congressman. It's as I was telling Congresswoman Chu, that it's really unfortunate, but we have to put our differences aside. When there's an attack on any part of our community, it is really an attack on the whole community. And so that's one thing that is very, very important for all of us to understand, that if it is on any of them. The other obviously issues are that now we are seeing a very active Department of Justice with Mr. Garland out there, and you have Vanita Gupta also has come in. So we're going to hopefully see a lot more active efforts in there. But really appreciate your leadership, Congressman, and really, if there's anything that you think that we can do, if there's a message or something, without putting any questions to you, please let us know. We are out there, and we'll continue doing the work that we're doing, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Sanjay. We've been friends for years, all of us, and all I can say is keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, and shine the spotlight on this issue. I want to just make one parting thought, which is to all of us who are thinking about India and what's happening with COVID in India. My prayers, my sincere wishes and blessings go to everybody who's trying to help and everybody who's been affected. And this is a time when we can all come together, regardless of race and regardless of background, to help people in India. And I urge everyone to do so. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman. Just as a last point, we are doing a lot of work on support to India. We have been working with the administration. We have a briefing with the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, and we've got now oxygen concentrators that we have raised funds going out, and PPE. So thank you so much, Congressman. Sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless. Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you so much. Well, that was the viewpoints of the lawmakers in the U.S. Congress. Now let's dig into the deeper questions that we have with our eminent and a brilliant panel. May I invite our panelists for the day today to join us. We are joined by Aarti Kohli. And may I request our producers to please give us the taglines? Yes, she is the Executive Director for Advancing Justice, the Asian Law Caucus. Thank you so much, Aarti ji, for joining. Welcome to the panel.
My pleasure.
We are now joined by Professor Pawan Dhingra. May I have his titling, please? Dr. Pawan Dhingra, he's a professor of American Studies at the Amherst College. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhingra, for joining us. A pleasure to have you, sir. We are now joined also with Sean Singh Guman, who is the co-founder of the National Sikh Campaign. Thank you so much, Sean Singh, for joining us. We are, last but not, of course, the least, we are joined by Dr. Maria Wong. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. She's a professor of East Asian and Gender Studies at the McGill University. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria, for joining the panel.
Thank you for the invitation.
A pleasure to have you, please. This is the opening round, as we mentioned, and in this round, we invite you to make your opening comments on the overall topic of the day. So may I start with Aarti Koliji, please? Your opening thoughts on the topic of the day. You can take up to 1 to 2 minutes to convey your thoughts. And folks, whosoever is watching, you've seen what a brilliant panel we have. Please keep your questions and comments coming, and I'm sure our panel here would, weave in or look into your questions and try and answer some of your thoughts also. Please, Aarti ji.
Thank you for inviting me. I am the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus, which is the first pan-Asian civil and legal rights organization in the country. We will turn 50 next year. And just like the Asian American population, we have grown very rapidly. We started off as a very small organization. Now, with all the crises that our community is facing, we have had to grow to meet the moment. And in this past year, as many of the other commentators have said, has been an incredibly challenging one. So I am Indian American. I was born in Chandigarh. I came here as a child with my parents, and I lived that journey that many immigrants do of trying to build a life here. And I remember the many moments that my family faced discrimination, whether it was on the street or in the workplace, and that this is something that unfortunately is a very normalized experience for our communities. So much so that people didn't even talk about it. And so what's happening now, I wanted to just start by framing things for people in that, yes, I think a lot of attention has been given to the violent hate, which is very real. But the data that we have shows that over 90% of the hate that's coming at people doesn't even rise to the level of crime. So it's being told to go back to your country. It's racial epithets. It's being refused service in a business. It's being refused a ride in the Uber or Lyft. And so that's what's happening now at a scale that we haven't seen since post 9/11. So I wanted to, just sort of frame the moment for people and acknowledge that. And I mean, I'm really excited to have this discussion with these great thinkers, because while legislation is good and policies are good, we're going to have long-term interventions to solve what is a crisis of white supremacy in this country. And it's a crisis that's been here since the founding of this country. So thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much for your opening thoughts. Absolutely, to look at, long-term, to take a long-term view and interventions that bring some solution or mitigate the challenges in the long term. Thank you so much, Aarti Koliji, please. May I now invite Professor Pawan Dhingra for his opening thoughts and comments on the topic of the day, which is, violence and hatred against Asian Americans in the United States. Dr. Dhingra, please.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be among these panelists and our Congress people. And thank you for those who are watching. And I want to pick up on what Aarti Koliji said, because I share much of what she shared. I believe in much of what she shared, which is that what we're seeing in these attacks, whether it be in Indianapolis, Atlanta, New York, San Francisco, or elsewhere, are really just the tip of the iceberg. Right? That's what's most visible to us, and it grabs our attention, and it's horrific. But like any iceberg, right, the bulk of it lies under the water that we can't see, right? And it's not just the slurs and the refusals of service and the like that we've seen this past year. And we've, hashtag Stop Asian Hate has documented, major increase for 4,000, I could get the number wrong, instances of this that aren't the level of crimes, but are still bias confronts. But even beyond that, even before COVID came, right, Asian Americans have been, including South Asians, have been framed as foreigners who are unwelcome, or at least not going to be fully appreciated as Americans in this country. And we see that not only when there's threats from external forces such as COVID or even 9/11, right, that Representative Chu mentioned. We see it even when Asian Americans are fulfilling the so-called American dream. When Asian Americans do well in school, I wrote about this in my book, Hypereducation, they can get applauded for that work, but they also get targeted as studying too much, told that they don't belong in schools because they're doing too well. When Asian Americans open up small businesses and they have their ethnic language on the banner, they get told you're not conducting your business properly, even though they're not breaking any local laws, right? In many ways, when Asian Americans are doing what we want people to do, open a small business, do well in school, buy a home, they get targeted as foreigners doing something wrong. And it ties directly to what Articoli said. There is a white normativity in this country, right, that connects to white supremacy, that unless we draw attention to that, we're always going to be on the outside looking in. We're always going to be looking for approval and not fully getting it, despite what we might be doing and despite how we might be acting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dhingra. I mean, of course, you made several points, but one point stands out for me, which is that we've thought that often the perception is that hate crimes often rise after some external impact like 9/11 or the COVID, right? But what you're saying is that, yes, those are triggers for some more, some a degree of higher, rise or a certain rise. But the element is that it's intrinsic and internal in any case. These external events which strike or trigger are, of course, there, but the intrinsic issue itself is there, that notwithstanding any external environment within America itself. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhingra. Now may I come to Sean Singh Gumman, please, for your opening comments, sir, of the National Sikh Campaign, co-founder.
Thank you, Robinder, and great to be here with you all. I'm already blown away by the comments laid out before me. I couldn't agree more. I think the inherent rise of white supremacy is one factor that combines with the inherent outsider perspective that many Americans look at Asians. And these confluence of factors have been kind of the source for all of this hate that has built up over the past few decades and have come to life and really are the tip of the iceberg, as Professor Dhingra mentioned. I want to start, though, by first explaining a little bit about the National Sikh Campaign. The organization was founded after the shooting at a Sikh Gurdwara, like Congressman Judy Chu had mentioned earlier, in Oak Creek, Wisconsin in August 2012. That hate crime in itself showed to the Sikh community how much resentment and hate still faced us even after 9/11, and that nothing had winnowed or waned, even though things had gone quiet for a little while. Our mission is to raise education and awareness of the Sikh faith to prevent future hate crimes against the community, especially in the United States. We have spent the last several years investing in media and content to explain our faith, and we have seen considerable success in generating awareness. That said, attacks like those that happened at the FedEx facility in Indianapolis, to the series of hate crimes that happened against Asian women in Atlanta just recently, it shows that we all have much work to do. And I'm excited to be here with this group to discuss. I just want to note that today is the 400th birth anniversary of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, the 9th Sikh Guru, who can really be a source of inspiration for all of us. As someone who martyred himself to protect the religious freedom of all people, he reminds us of our sacred duty to witness the humanity that unites all of us to serve and protect everyone. So, as we find strength in his story during this difficult time that we face today, as we endure the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm excited to share the struggle with you all to uproot racism and discrimination from all involved. I'm looking forward to digging in.
Thank you so much, Sean. And of course, you raised or you reminded us of Guru Tegh Bahadur today. And in fact, yes, that's what I mean. Inspirations from Nobel lives who have lived their lives. We have to kind of bring several of these, thoughts together towards a greater perfection in our societies. Thank you so much. And our panel discussion is flowing in a very interesting manner. We've had Aarti more, let's say, if I were to say on the practitioner side, then we had Dr. Dhingra, let's say from the academia, then we have Sean, let's say again from the practitioner activist side, and now we come to Dr. Maria from the academic side, right? So, Dr. Maria Wong, your thoughts on the topic of the day, please.
Thank you again for inviting me to participate in this very timely and important conversation. So I'd like to start today by centering gender in my discussion. As has been mentioned, Stop AAPI Hate has reported nearly 3,800 hate incidents. Yet these incidents are not just about race. In the current climate, women are more than 2 times more likely to be victimized than men. So the murders of the women of Asian descent in Atlanta has encouraged necessary and overdue discussions about anti-Asian violence. Yet the dominant discourse frames our understanding of the violence against women as either an issue of race or gender. On the one hand, many Asian American scholars have situated the Atlanta murders within a 150-year history of anti-Asian violence. On the other hand, many feminists discuss the murders to draw attention to women's subjugation. What I would argue today is that the murders in Atlanta reflect neither just gender or racial hate. Instead, they reflect both simultaneously. And they point to a global pattern of misogyny and violence against Asian women. So I want to highlight today that it is necessary for us to discuss and examine how race and gender simultaneously shape Asian women's vulnerability to violence.
Very, very interesting thoughts. And I think we got a wonderful panel, examining the issue from various perspectives. And lastly, that you brought out the issue of gender also. Absolutely so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. Meanwhile, of course, we've been getting comments from our viewers. Guys, please, folks, keep on giving your questions and comments. We'll be more than happy to take up your questions and thoughts. We had a comment from Steve Rao saying, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Steve, for watching by, coming by. Now we move on to the second round of our discussions. In this round, the overall question is, and again, we leave it to you as to how you would like to analyze, dissect, or slice the question, is that the bill which has been recently passed, the hate crimes bill, right, in the Senate. The question in this round would be that, how effective do you think this bill would be? And is there anything else you would have wanted to see in it? Or because you see there's a House version to come up right soon, and the House and Senate versions would be then reconciled to create the final bill, let's say. So that's the question in this round. So may I begin with Sanjay Puri? Sanjay, sir, your thoughts on the bill which has been passed in the Senate right now. How effective do you think the bill would be, especially given the thoughts and comments of all our eminent panel as they've just given in their opening comments? Your audio is on mute, please.
Sorry, Robinder. I think it's a great step that has happened. This bill, firstly, the majority with which it passed was 94-1, which really is basically unanimous, except I think it was Senator Josh Haley from Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. But so that makes a big statement that the country is united on doing this. And also, it really puts the onus on Department of Justice, which is now, as I mentioned before, has some really teeth to pursuing these kinds of crimes. But I would also like to see if there's more money that is allocated. Sean talked about education. I think education is a big challenge in this country because Congresswoman Judy Chu said people are getting attacked who are not even Chinese because people think they're Chinese. The Sikh community has been at the largest receiving end for so many of these things. Sean's organization is doing education. The U.S. government, whether it's Department of Justice or whatever else, has to do a lot more in terms of education. I think that is a big, big aspect of what is missing, Ravinder.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Oh, absolutely. Education is one of the key. I mean, that's the foundation for the future, the long term plan. It's all in the mind of the children who are going to grow up to be the adults of tomorrow. And in fact, one of our lead questions in this is on education. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for your thoughts. Then now come to Arti Kohli, please. Again, the question to you is that the version of the bill which has been passed in the Senate, how effective do you think it is? What more would you have liked to see in it? Or what would you like to see maybe in the House version? And then when these two versions are reconciled for the final version?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things in the bill is that it requires online reporting in multiple languages. So the recognition that one of the challenges for API communities is language access is good, right? Because what we're finding is that a lot of the folks who are experiencing hate are limited English speaking folks. And so they don't feel comfortable reporting. And so much of what's happening isn't reported. And I know, Stop API Hate, and then we have a hate tracker as well, Stand Against Hatred, and the reports we get are in English. And so when you talk to folks who have experienced hate, they'll tell you that, well, this happened, but then these other things happened to me last month and the month before, which they've never told anybody. And so the other piece that I think the legislation, one of the challenges is when the government is the holder, is where people report, or law enforcement, there is a lack of trust and there's a lack of connection. So people come from all different, migration experiences. They come from countries where they don't trust the police. Right. And then we're here where there's a lot of distrust happening now, too. Right. So what we are finding is actually people are far more comfortable reporting to their community-based organizations. So one of the things that I've been wondering is there a way to get resources to community-based organizations to provide the support? Because those are the organizations that are in the backyard and they've built trust with community. So much of this has to do with trust. And so, and one of the challenges is, like you saw in Atlanta, right? The cop said the guy was having a bad day. And what you have in law enforcement, and this is something that I know that people are looking at, is you have a strain of folks in law enforcement who actually don't have a recognition of racial bias. Right. And so, which is why you have the Department of Justice who often come in, right, to local places. And so I think it's, some of the aspects of the bill are good, as particularly also the Jabara Hire Hate Act, which has been just part of the legislation, which also allows for for when something isn't, a violent act, looking at alternatives, right? Could we do restorative justice? Because particularly when hate, for example, is happening in a school, right? That's an age where someone you can intervene, right? So what are these interventions to have people become re-educated, think about the harm that they're doing, and learn? And so we're not going to be able to solve this by just punishing and incarcerating everybody who commits an act of hate.
Thank you so much, Arti. I think you make a great point. I mean, exactly, no matter how soever maybe, legislations may be passed or policies put into place, unless there are, as you're mentioning, reports and reporting is there and trust so that there is trust and reporting and action on the ground within community organizations, such laws and legislations would not go anywhere and would not be as effective as they are supposed to be or meant to be. Thank you so much. May I now come to Professor Dhingra, again on your thoughts on this question or perspective that the Senate version of the bill, how happy, quote unquote, if we could say that, or how effective do you think would it be, and what else or what more would you like to see in it? Because there's still time before the final bill between the House and the Senate comes out. So any public debate or a discourse or a discussion could have some impact. And folks, absolutely, whosoever is listening, please do pitch in, join in, put in your comments and thoughts. Likes are good. This is Facebook Live, so we are getting many likes. That's good and great. But we always love to build up more interaction and engagement with our viewers. So please put in your comments in addition to your likes. Yes, Professor Dhingra, please.
Thank you. I'll confess, I'm not a huge supporter of hate crime legislation, and I'll say a bit why. I appreciate where it's coming from, in the sense that we should realize that not all crimes are equal. And even if the act is the same, what's behind it is meaningful, and that is something we should consider. However, hate crime legislation has the effect of saying someone was targeted because the person who attacked has hate in them. And so it becomes about the individual's motives as the main focus around whether or not it qualifies as a hate crime. And just pick up on Dr. Wong's comments a minute ago. So much of what happens that we're seeing against Asian Americans has to do with the intersection of race and gender. But I don't think a hate crime act is going to be able to tease out how gender and our stereotypes around Asian American women, which may not be hate driven, right? I mean, you can have stereotypes of people that aren't hate driven, but are exoticizing them, right? Thinking of them as, again, in the case of Atlanta, a temptation. Is that the same thing as hate? I mean, it's hard to say. And instead of focusing on the individual's motives, maybe we should pay more attention to the conditions that are creating the crimes in the first place. And the other part about this, I'll try to be brief, because I know we have a lot to talk about, is that the idea of hate crimes acts was brought up originally as a way to protect people of color from whites who are targeting them with racist motives. I can appreciate that. But today, an increasing number of people who are apprehended and considered as committing hate crimes are themselves people of color. And that gets away from the original intent behind the idea of a hate crimes law. And so instead of pitting one racial group against another racial group to try to tease out who hates whom, who should be punished for what, right? I rather consider, why are we having these problems in the first place? And how can we address this in the first place and not, spend as much time having to dwell on, well, what was the exact motive of this crime at this moment, when that's really hard to tease out, especially for crimes against Asian Americans, where there's not necessarily, a symbol that we can refer to or a clear epithet that we're going to latch onto to designate something as hate-filled or not.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. I mean, that's a very interesting and a very powerful point, of course. And it reminds to my mind, I think, an underlying theme which all of our panel has been mentioning of all along is maybe education or interventions which kind of address the issue in the long term. So rather than the point is that technology or pointed intervention can only take you so far. The bigger context is what are the conditions which are incubating such such mindsets. Brilliant point. Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. May I now come to Sean Singh Bhuman, please. Sir, your thoughts on this point, the bill which has been passed by the Senate, how effective do you think it would be, and what more could be done with it to make it more effective?
Yeah, no, great point so far. Just generally to see something pass 94-1 in a U.S. Senate or congressional body is incredible. Just to see that level of bipartisanship is important, and it shows how important and relevant this legislation is during this time. Yeah, I take Professor Dhingra's points, to heart. I think they make sense. I do have a bit of a pushback on that. A key challenge outlined by the bill is the incomplete level of data around hate crimes, which is honestly why it is such a big issue. There isn't a real standard set by the government on addressing hate because there's just no data to verify it. The government does something when they see the problem. And so I get why the bill is constantly focused on law enforcement and how they're investigating the crime or receiving information from a victim or a community group, as Arti had spoke about. This is important because we need to complete this level of data so we can significantly understand the level of hate that exists in this country. Without that level of data, we're just going to see further inaction from the government in particular. So I think that's really, really important and something that this bill should address if we can get it done the right way. That said, I think Sanjay took the words out of my mouth when it comes to education. You know, for the National Sick Campaign, we conducted a national survey a few years ago of Americans that showed that 60% of Americans know nothing at all about Sikhs and never even heard of the faith prior to the survey. And after some education about key tenets of the Sikh faith, including our values of equality and hard work, positive perceptions of those unaware of Sikhs improved significantly. And we're a small organization. And while we have seen considerable impact, you know, through advertising, through, you know, concentrated efforts on getting hard to reach communities to engage with our faith, just imagine if we could have both public and private resources dedicated to this education and work. We could amplify it considerably and really get to some of these core issues that plague communities that are the ones instigating hate crimes. And so that is where I like this bill, especially if the House were to take this on and dig into it further, was to dedicate and build out that level of public education and how the government can really explore this in a deep and meaningful way, especially in front of hard to reach communities in rural, uneducated, and conservative areas of the country.
Thank you so much, Sean. Absolutely. You know, again, the emphasis, I think at least I personally also cannot agree more than, I mean, I'm totally passionate about it personally on this issue of education. I mean, there's a lot more to that, but I'll hold back my thoughts, but absolutely agreed and beautifully said. So thank you so much. May I now invite Dr. Maria Wong for her thoughts, your thoughts, ma'am, on whether or how effective do you think this bill could be, and what more would you have liked to see in this bill or in the coming soon future, if there's a newer version or a modified version of this bill?
I do agree that the bill is an important symbolic statement. I also do agree that we need to study anti-Asian hate and violence. But like Professor Ding, I'm also not a supporter of hate crimes framework. That is because when we think of hate crimes framework, and when we seek justice through that framework, we risk putting ourselves as members of Asian American community and other marginalized community, especially racialized community. We risk putting ourselves at a greater danger, not necessarily of individual assailants or mass shooters, but we risk putting ourselves at a greater danger of violence in the hands of the police. And we see this clear examples of violence in the hands of the police as something that Asian Americans experience. As we see this in the example of the deaths of Christian Hall and Angelo Quinto recently. I would argue that what we need to focus on is on policies and grassroots organization that supports Asian Americans who are most vulnerable to violence, including economic violence. For instance, in the case of Asian massage workers who were the target of the murders in Atlanta, Brown professor Elena Shih has argued that what Asian massage workers need are is not greater policing. In fact, the greater policing harms them. What they need are affordable housing, livable wage. They need safe working conditions, and they need the ability to organize when their rights are violated. We also, I think, like, especially this is really relevant during this time. We also need to address and examine, for instance, why Filipino nurses in California are account for nearly 70% of COVID-related deaths when they only account for 20% of the total nursing population in the state. And then we need to also really sort of pay attention and address the fact that, you know, many essential workers are actually people of color, and that, you know, calling them essential workers, you know, have not necessarily addressed the devaluation of their labor. Calling them essential workers did not necessarily result in better working conditions, in safe working conditions, and that calling them as essential workers have not necessarily resulted in material remuneration. So in other words, you know, what we need is not greater policing. What we need are life affirming services, and also and the elevation of Asian American rights.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maria Huang. The interesting point, the takeaway I'm getting from your, and I think several of the speakers on this particular round, is that uh, let's say there are two tracks you're saying that. One is what are the enabling conditions which enable such mindsets which lead to hate crimes and violence? And the other is targeted interventions which prevent crimes or punish. So what you're saying is that the bill which is out there is more along this track, is looking at targeted maybe interventions which look to prevent crimes or punish the crimes or something like that, rather than looking at the other track, which is that what are the enabling conditions in the society which have to be, you know, worked upon so as to reduce this mindset in society. Thank you so much. We have another comment coming in from Hasumati Chudasma. She's saying, yes, I agree with more rights and hazard pay for essential workers. Thank you so much, Hasumati. You are following this discussion very nicely. Thank you so much for being an engaged participant with us. Now, may we move on to the next round? In this round, the question is that we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement, which, of course, roiled the United States and society. The question in this round is that, and this may be, you know, like it may be, it has political nuances or social nuances or whatever, all those nuances, and is something which is out there. The question is that does it or would it make sense for the Asian American communities to join quote unquote forces, quote unquote, with the BLM forces, okay, in order to bring about a bigger impact against hate crimes and violence in the country? May I begin with Sanjay Puri, please? Mr. Puri, Sanjay.
Well, you know, I just think any kind of racial or any other kind of crime or bias is wrong. The BLM movement is a very important movement, and you know, it has had pretty big significance. You've seen, as I said, with the recent presidential elections. Um, you know, I really think that when you look at what's happens in our community, when I say community, it's just across the board, and this was something we discussed with Congresswoman Judy Chu. When let's say a Chinese American or Korean American is attacked, or a Sikh American is attacked, I think we all kind of need to step up. So when you saw the BLM movement, there were a lot of non-black or non-African Americans who kind of were participating in that movement. And I think that's the kind of vigor we need to have across the board, that racial related activities are just purely wrong, whether it's against uh, black Americans, Asian Americans, just any kind of, and whether it's a gender based. Now, we are not going to have a perfect society. I don't think anywhere where there is, but we are striving for a society that is looking at people without the biases of gender, race, sexual persuasion, all the things that we aspire to, and that's enshrined in the constitution of this country. You go back to the constitution of this country, and a reason that a lot of us came here is the freedoms that people can enjoy. And I think, as far as partnership with BLM, I think there should be a partnership with them and others. But I think we also have internally to see that when we look at the BLM movement, we don't say it's somebody else's problem. When we look at acts against Chinese Americans, it's somebody else's problem, or whether it's Sikh Americans or anybody else. It really is an act that really needs to be, we all need to stand up. If it's something against a person with disabilities, we need to speak against that. So I think that would be my thought, Robinder.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for your thoughts. Absolutely. May I now invite Aarti Koliji for your thoughts on this question? Overall, like, I mean, you see, I mean, let's look at vectors in society which are out there, right? And how to achieve. And I mean, as Sanjay is saying, a lot of saying, race, be it any, with regards to anything, is a, or hate
Yeah.
crime, hatred is not a, absolutely not a done thing any which way. But is there, or are there is there movement towards more synchronization, synergies, building alliances, discussions with the BLM and the Asian American communities to jointly address in some vague manner,
Yeah,
even
no,
though.
we absolutely work with the movement for Black Lives, and we so it's not a question of should we are at least on the advocacy side.
Sure.
I think one of the things to remember is that there's a couple of key demands coming out of that movement space, and those demands are around reducing the focus on law enforcement, and whether it's called defunding the police, ending mass incarceration, abolition, whatever you want to call it. There's a range. There's basically one demand, which is that we are putting way too much money into our systems of incarceration and policing, which are then harming people of color. And then the other demand is about investment, right? Investments in low-income communities, particularly low-income communities of color. And I really appreciated Maria's point when you asked about violence. When we talk about violence, it's not just the physical moments that we've seen on video. There is economic violence, and the workers that you're talking about, those are our clients every day. The low-wage workers who are not getting COVID protection, the tenants who are getting evicted because they can't afford to pay their rent, people who are sitting in immigration detention at risk of COVID. The same week of the deaths in Atlanta, there was a deportation flight to Vietnam. So these are all the different forms of violence that both Asian American communities face, and then other communities of color are facing. And the solution really is systems change. And so systems change, no one community can achieve alone, right? So much of our work is done in interracial coalitions with other communities of color, because we understand that no one, and then we want to make sure that we are being led by people who have directly experienced the harm, because they're the ones who are the most knowledgeable about what's wrong with the system. And so that's one of the things we do, in our work, is we make sure that we are listening to our clients, to the communities that we're serving, and we're the solutions that we're coming up with are formed together. So, although we might be lawyers, we're not always the smartest people in the room. And so I wanted to, just remind us of that, is that we really have to be led by the people who are impacted. And so absolutely, I think we will not achieve the goals for social progress that we have for our communities if we don't work with other communities.
Thank you so much, Aarti Koleji. Absolutely. I mean, and of course, thanks for sharing the work that you do, because I do think it's important for our viewers, right, to understand and to relate the kind of various, let's say, works which are being done by various agencies or folks to address these challenges. So, thank you so much for sharing
Sure.
your thoughts and your work in this context. May I now come to Professor Pawan Dhingra? Again, the question, as the leading question, the BLM movement issues, grievances, the Asian American issues, grievances, challenges. Would there be more? Could there be more? Should, or is there already, as Aarti Kohli is saying, there's already a lot of synergies happening? But can these vectors in a society, add up more?
That's a great question, and a question for our particular, historical moment. And I completely agree with what Arthi Kohli said, and I appreciated it deeply. So I'll be brief because I don't want to echo things instead. So I'll just add a little bit to say that if we're going to, as we should, and as we are, engage with Black Lives Matter and other social justice movements built around race and fighting against white supremacy, we need to do some kind of interrogations of our own people, our own selves, right, and address the anti-Blackness that's part of our own communities. It also means that we should go beyond thinking that some of our most likely pathways will be sufficient. So, education, which I know is we'll talk about in a minute, and I completely believe is essential, is not enough, right, to address the problems that we're seeing against communities, our own and others, if we're going to take seriously a commitment to Black Lives Matter. Because as Arthur Coley said, right, it's about major structural changes that enlightening people's minds about our differences will not adequately address. And I'll end by saying that this is not something new, right? There's been a long and promising history of allyship and coalition building between South Asians and African Americans, and Asian Americans in general and African Americans, going back decades. And so this is something we can call upon a different history of ourselves as inspiration to work together in today's current moment.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. I could not, by the way, help but notice, and pardon me, Hyper Education, a book on your shelf back there. So maybe we'll pick it up sometime. Thank you for your thoughts. In fact, the last round question would be on education, but we are running short on time, so I'll come on some specifics there. But before we move on to that, thank you for your thoughts on this particular topic. Now, may I please come to Sean Singh Guban, please? Your thoughts on this question or this topic or this issue. The BLM forces, vectors, movement, the Asian American context challenges. Where are we on that?
Absolutely. Well, I agree with both prior speakers. I think a lot of what I'm going to say is so I'll be brief as well. I want to start by just sharing a quote from activist Valerie Kaur. I think it speaks to this in a really deep way. She says, "Shallow solidarity is based on the logic of exchange. You show up for me and I will show up for you. But deep solidarity is rooted in recognition. I show up for you because I see you as part of me. Your liberation is bound up in my own." And I think that's a profound way to look at this. And I think it speaks to what Professor Dhingra was saying about us looking at ourselves and our own biases affecting how we perceive things as well. And so I'm with, I think Arthi also brought up law enforcement as a key unifying area. Absolutely, 100%. As you saw in the bill, that's a big piece of understanding hate crimes is law enforcement education and awareness. Same thing in racial injustice within the policing system. There's a lot of synergy there. And I think that there's also an opportunity for both communities and all social justice efforts to think creatively. We're too often stuck in sensitivity trainings or unconscious bias training or these very superficial ways of looking at training and education. And there's deeper, more profound ways. And if we can look at each other and think creatively as a group, I think we could really come up with some interesting policy.
Thank you so much, Sean. And absolutely, I agree. I miss speaking or referring to the point which Professor Dhingra had made, and which you kind of re-emphasize, the point of looking inside, introspection, and our own selves itself is extremely critical. Absolutely. And of course, then coming to education. We'll come to that in the last round or penultimate round now. But before that, may I now invite Dr. Maria Wong for your thoughts on this question that the BLA movement, Asian American issues, challenges both are facing. How are they kind of creating synergies? Can they be creating synergies to effect more societal change?
Yeah, so I agree what everyone has said, and I, at the risk of repeating, what I'm just going to talk about is, right after the Atlanta murders, there was an anti-Asian violence protest here in Montreal, where I live, because I teach at McGill University, and what I saw during the protest was not necessarily just about challenging anti-Asian racism. The speakers spoke about immigrant rights. The speakers spoke about workers' rights. The speakers spoke about the violence that Indigenous people experience. And the speakers spoke about the violence that racialized people have to confront here in Canada. So for me, that is a framework that I embrace, and that is a discussion that I would like us to have moving forward. And I will have to add that it is the kind of discussion that a lot of students are actually having. They recognize that challenging the system of white supremacy and is going to really need solidarity work, and we also need to really question and examine the structure of settler colonialism. So,
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Wong. Meanwhile, we have been getting comments from some viewers and likes and all. I'll just read out some comments quickly. Everybody looks up to America. Thank you. It's the greatest country in the world. I think we should be grateful for living in such a great country. And thank you so much for your thoughts and comments. Now, moving on to this was from Hasumati Chudasma. Thank you so much, Hasumati. Now, the penultimate round, before the last round would be your wrap up comments, whichever way you would like to take. But before that last round, one quick round on education. It's a topic, I think, which is of much relevance, and we all realize it, all of us here and everyone else also. The question I have is, there can be different kinds of interventions or strategies with respect to education, what we each mean. But the question is that, can some curriculum, and I understand the huge challenges of introducing any new curriculum or changes in the curriculums, right? But if you look at trends worldwide, there are curriculums on happiness, compassion, kindness, etc., being introduced in school curricula, right? Can such curriculum help the children of today who are in school to become more compassionate, more kind, and also, by the way, reduce bullying in the schools, right? And then later, when they become adults, which would lead to them probably being less prone to extremist or extremism thinking or hatred thinking. So my question is that, so that's one model I'm tossing out for the entire panel. But apart from that, any your thoughts on what can be some specific policies or interventions regarding education, which could be helpful for the medium to long term? Because education will not have benefits in the short term, I think, right? Whatever would be, it will take a while to kind of seep into the system, seep into the minds. So beginning with Sanjay, so any one, two specific comments you might have with regards to education, how to really kind of push it forward. Sanjay Puri, please.
Robinder, as far as education, and obviously Professor Dhingra and Professor Wong would be better attuned to saying it, but our campuses, at least in the United States, are basically a reflection of America. Our kids are, in many cases, especially going to California, it's, as diverse as you can get. I think, given that now with the pandemic, what has happened, the world of education is also changing, because you used to go to the universities to study. Now the universities are coming to you to be educated. So how do we take that model and make sure that we are getting this kind of an education, getting this kind of an awareness, especially in rural America, especially in parts of America where maybe the diversity is not as much? Because I don't see the challenges as much where you see very diverse campuses, etc. But where you don't have diversity and you use technology as it is being used for the past year, etc. And I think those would be the important things where I would love to hear from the two academics that we have on the panel, Robinder.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for your thoughts. Absolutely, yeah, I mean, the whole paradigm of education, or how the delivery of education or imbibing of education has been there for zillions of years, is changing now, thanks or this blessed COVID. Now may I come to Arti Kohli. Your comments, you may pick some quick comments and a short this thing as you would feel, which you think could be some, doable, practical, or blue sky thinking on education.
Yeah, I don't think we can accept each other if we don't understand each other and if we don't know each other's histories. And so for us, it's not just at the college level. I mean, I didn't learn about the history of Asian Americans, about the Chinese Exclusion Act, about Japanese American internment, about the other Asian exclusion acts until I got to college and I took classes. So we've been advocating for ethnic studies curricula in the K through 12 curriculum, both in California, but in other states. And this is a fight that is happening in a lot of different states. And it's actually, you will find that people don't want this curricula. And so you have to really, I mean, I think this is one place where people can get engaged and make sure that our histories are a part of what's being taught to our kids. And the second quick piece I will say is, I mentioned this before, but I think it's a really important investment, which is on restorative justice practices within school systems. So when hate happens, it's seen as a learning moment, and a moment for the perpetrator to understand what's wrong with what they did. And because the harm is not just to the kid who's bullied, the harm is to the community. And the community has to recognize and hold, have accountability for what's happening. And so just kicking the kid out of school is not going to be the answer. It's not going to fix, not going to get to the root cause. So those are the two interventions that we think would be useful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your your analysis and your sharing your perspective on this particular topic. Now, may I come to Professor Pawan Dhingra? Your thought on this question: education, where K through 12 or the college level education, or I mean, education can also be community. Community, the various aspects of education one can look at. But your thoughts, sir, couple of points or two, three bullet points which you would like to share.
Well, Arti, as usual, said something I would love to echo, which is the importance of this in the K through 12 realm as opposed to just the higher education. So few Americans go to college, and even fewer finish college. So we can't look at higher education as somehow a solution to our educational needs. And at the state level, it's growing. So that's, I want to co-sign on that. And another thing I would just add, and to your point, that education takes place outside of schools, right? So let's echo back to former President Trump's 1776 commission, which was trying to create a certain vision of history, American exceptionalism, that would be shared in our monuments, in our state parks, and elsewhere. We can take that idea and turn it on its head and have a commission on the history of white supremacy, how that has shaped our country's founding and our culture and our current outcomes today. And that can be educational pieces that are part of our national parks, where indigenous land has been stolen, or in our monuments or elsewhere. We can think about education that takes place outside of the schools, so it's not just about the next generation and what they can bring to the table, but about ourselves and our peers and our elders, what we need to learn now in order to better our relationships with one another.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. Brilliant point. Very interesting, especially about education of outside the schools, and of course K through 12, because those are the formative years. Is the programming of the mind. So the way our minds are programmed in the childhood is what we become as adults. So it's K through 12, perhaps most absolutely. Coming to now, Sean Singuman, your thoughts, sir, education.
Yeah, I mean, I think the earlier we can start, the better. And I'm really proud of what the work SIT Coalition has done in particular, really diving into like school curriculums and really working at the grassroots level to bring education around Sikhi into school curriculums, but generally about Asian history. But I want to speak to some of the work that we do at National Sikh Campaign and really focusing on the ability to use mainstream media and entertainment and culture to also provide education in deeply profound ways. This year in itself has been like the year for Korean Americans. Minari, several other examples of them breaking through music and culture and food have been tremendous for their awareness in this country. And I think that Asian Americans generally are now really breaking through on the on the entertainment side, and that has been tremendous. And the more we can do that, the more that we can create content and really break through in different ways. We did a video with Funny or Die, which is Will Ferrell's production company, about the Sikh turban and you know, how like kind of the political, like the, sorry, what's the word? You know, PC crowd within work and being kind of like open to talk about your differences. And it worked really, really well. It had like over 500,000 views, and it just shows that there is ability to do things outside of traditional, you know, political or educational realms. And so I think that as a community-wide thing, we should embrace more and really invest in to make that as a piece of how we educate others around us, and really getting into those communities that aren't on traditional, you know, media. For us, by us is real. FUBU is not just a Killuling mine. It's a real thing that we as a community do for ourselves, and we educate ourselves and we educate allies, but we don't try hard enough to get in front of people who aren't paying attention to those same things. And we now have the opportunity to do so through influencer marketing, through digital media. We can get on Breitbart and have a story. We just got to do it the right way.
Thank you so much, sir. A very interesting point, of course. Yeah, I think, I mean, the traditional notion when people talk about education, we assume it's like a one-way street. There's a teacher standing in a classroom and 20 students sitting, and there's just one way, boring lectures being conducted. It is not that. Education has to be, you know, age appropriate, fun, and woven in with multiple other dynamics. You know, it's more absorption. It's more about absorption for the, you know, listener's mind, that he or she would enjoy, relate, and learn and grow with it. Thank you so much, sir, for your, you know, throwing a light on that aspect of education, like learning. Now, may I come to Dr. Maria Huang for your thoughts concluding this particular round, and then we come to the last round, which is concluding thoughts, any which way each one of the speakers would wrap up their comments. But before that, education context. Dr. Maria.
So I agree, curriculum change is really very important. Actually, I became a professor because I came to the United States as a student, and I took an ethnic studies class, and you know, I learned so much about the history that I was never thought before. And so I said, okay, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to teach. But I think more than curriculum change, we also need to actually support training of teachers who can teach these courses, who can teach Asian American history, who can teach courses about Asian American experiences. That's one thing. But more importantly, we really need to support the hiring of teachers in all levels, K-12, college, and hiring them at, you know, offering them living wage, not poverty wage. The college level, for instance, you know, there's so many brilliant teachers and scholars who are teaching at salary that are offered to adjuncts, and these are teachers and well-trained scholars who are facing poverty, especially you know, at this very moment. So curriculum change is an important step, but we also need to support training and the hiring of teachers.
Brilliant point. Absolutely, absolutely, Dr. Maria. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Now, this brings us to the conclusion of our questioning round, etc. Now we are the last round, which is your wrap-up comments on the overall discussion of the day. In this round, I'll take a slight liberty and I'll request Sanjay to be the last speaker, because then he can wrap up with the other instead of going the first and then other speaking. Right, Sanjay? If I may take that liberty to break that order.
I insist you take that liberty, Robinder.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. So therefore, may I invite Aarti Kohli for your wrap-up comments on the topic of the day and the discussion and the messaging. And please do keep in mind that this will be put up on YouTube, on the US India Political Action Committee YouTube, as well as on Imagine India Institute YouTube. And we'll be sending it, sharing it, and we'll request you also to share with your friends and family. In fact, another thing that we've been thinking is that we've been having such wonderful conversations in these noon hours. We are thinking of taking the transcripts and putting it in the form of a reader or a book kind of a thing, right? Because we've had a bunch of like 40 or a good number of such conversations with brilliant thoughts. So we are thinking probably to make a transcript of all of these and then also create a book out of it, which could be of value and value essentially. So that's the quality of the discussion and the conversations that our panel brings to us. Thank you so much. So please, Aarti Kohli, your wrap-up comments. And thank you so much, Hasumati Chudasma. She's mentioned K-pop. Yeah, of course, K-pop and K-fashion and kimchi is all taking over the world. We love Korea. Thank you. Now, may I come to Aarti Kohli for your concluding comments, please?
Yeah, I think because I am South Asian and I head up one of the oldest Asian American organizations in the country, I think about this idea of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, AEPI, even that term, a lot. And I really appreciate that in this conversation, there is so much inclusivity and this idea of who we are. But it's a political identity that we have, right? We're not one language, we're not one country, we're many different migration experiences. And one of the things I think for particularly the Indian community to recognize is we do have diversity of class, but on the whole, there's a lot of privilege that we have. And so when you look at Asian Americans, we have the biggest wealth gap in the country. And my organization serves primarily low-income Asian Americans. We're invisible. That part of our community is hidden because we're so perceived as the model minority, right? And I think it's really important for us this is a moment when we think about hate, we think about violence, we think about building power in our community. We have to think about to what end? Because we're the fastest growing racial minority in this country. And by 2050, we'll be 10% of the population in a majority minority country. And so people have said to us, as are seeing us as the wedge, right? Who are we going to align with? Are we going to align with forces for social progress, like the movement for Black Lives? Or are we going to align with people who say, you know what, we're going to protect our privilege that we have right now? So these are the questions that we face as a community, not just, I will say as an Indian American about that too. And I'm really pleased that this conversation has been so deep and that people are recognizing the complexity of the challenges before us. And so I would just say that I have a lot of hope for us as a community that will be a force for good. And thank you for including me in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Aarti Kohli. Thank you so much for your wrap-up comments, and thank you for your, I think we all really thoroughly learned and enjoyed the conversation and the insights that you brought to the conversation. Thank you so much. May I now invite Professor Pawan Dhingra for your wrap-up comments, concluding thoughts on the topic of the day, sir, please.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here, and for the people I've been speaking alongside. I've learned, and I've as much as I've been able to contribute, I've learned more actually. So I appreciate this opportunity. And I think as we kind of right now in our current moment, as I open the news, as I talk with my family, like so much of my conversations, and I'm sure many others, is what's going on right now in India with the COVID crisis. And the horrific scenes that we're seeing and hearing about with our family and friends back home, right? And I think one thing we should avoid doing is saying, well, there are, U.S.-India relation issues, and there are Indian-American domestic issues, right? And we should realize these things are connected. And as we follow what Aarti Kohli said, if we connect our issues here, right, with whether it be Black lives, whether it be indigenous persons, whether it be those fighting for social justice, social progress, right? Whatever form that might take in local space or nationally, right? We improve our place here, and I think are strengthened in a way to then actually help what's going on in India more. So it's not a choice we have to make between working for issues over there or working for issues here, but seeing as how the search for progress, for health rights and medical rights, right, for economic justice, or whatever that might look like, right? These are cut across borders, and our position should be one of making connections here in order to help those back home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dingra. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point, I think. And I think in our opening comments, and when I mentioned about the topics we pick up, we had mentioned that, mostly we pick up topics of interest to the Indian American community, which are domestic in nature purely. And at times we pick up topics which are US India relations. So, yes, we do understand and much appreciate. And your point that, the Indian American community and its interests and its progress and the social dynamics for the community within the United States is one facet, right? And U.S.-India relations is something linked also, but separate. And I mean, it's a nuance there, very, very rightly pointed out. Thank you, sir. May I now invite Shyam Singh Woman for your concluding thoughts, sir.
Yes, I just want to thank you all for having me and having my voice be a part of all these other great voices. And I have learned so much as well. It's really been an honor. Thank you to each of you other panelists. I want to speak to something that Aarti said that I still think is, I'm still kind of profoundly blown away with what she said. But generally, the idea that there are so many different types of Asian within the Asian American community. And I think that sometimes speaks to the perspective some communities take when seeing other communities being attacked. There is sometimes like, oh, that's an isolated event. That's a Sikh problem, or that's an Asian American problem or Oriental problem, that they're facing that. And as a Sikh American, I'm particularly aware of hate crime, hate violence, and what it signifies for a community, just because it's been so kind of omnipresent within our historical. I mean, it's since I've been born, it's been there, and it's something that has been kind of hurting family members of my own, friends of my own, things I've seen and we've all faced in some ways. But we often do kind of take this narrow mindset at times where we don't empathize in a way that really speaks to the humanity of all of our communities together. And I think generally we have to work on ourselves before we can really truly make the impact we want to see in this country in particular. And so I just want to reiterate that, like, this conversation isn't something that we can put on the government or put on other communities. It's something that we have to own and really take forward. We can't expect people to learn about us. We can't expect people to not attack us. The only thing we can do is take proactive steps to either prevent them, to educate the other, or really, fix the solution in our own way, so that there's no other thing that we can do to not take these active steps in making a better world for our generation today and future generations. And so with that said, I really do appreciate the time that you all have had me here, and I look forward to furthering the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sean. Absolutely. I mean, the point which you mentioned, that within the mosaic of Asian American community, there are like Indian American, Korean American, or perspective that Sikh American is maybe not. I mean, there nuances people are looking out there. Uh, so which all have to kind of come together also, right, and build coalitions or alliances within the wider tent out there. That's absolutely important point, that this is something which is happening. It doesn't affect my community, it affects some other community, maybe Vietnamese American, so we stay out of it, kind of a thing. Absolutely. Anything to do with the broad principles of equity and justice has to be has to be an issue of concern, and proactive steps whichever can be taken by the community and communities. Thank you so much, Sean. May I now invite Dr. Maria Wong for your concluding thoughts and comments on this discussion.
I'd like to conclude by echoing uh, Professor Dingver's comment about making connections. Anti-Asian violence has specific manifestations in the United States, but it is felt not just in the US. It is felt in Canada. It is felt in Europe. So I think it's important for us to have a broader conversation about it. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation. As someone who identifies as Asian American, as Filipino, but who lives and work in Canada, it is. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to participate in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wong. I think it's our mutual gain for each of us on this panel and for our viewers. What insights and consensus or the dialogue or the conversations which develop with this platform right now here. Thank you so much for your thoughts. May I now invite Sanjay Puri, Chairman and founder of the US India Political Action Committee, for your wrap-up comments on the panel of the day today. Sanjay, please, sir.
Well, my comment would be thank you to all the fantastic panelists and the two members of Congress that we had. As all of us said, I really have learned. I don't claim to be an expert on race relations or hate crimes, but I do believe that we all have accountability. Sean, Arti, and Professor Dingra and Professor Huang all talked about it. We all have a role, and we all have to speak up when any part of our community is attacked, whatever that part is. So I think that's a message that we have to propagate within our organization and others. Dr. Dhingra also talked about looking deep within our soul, that if we have any biases, and cleansing ourselves first of things that need to happen. And I think Sean talked about education. I really strongly believe that that has a very important role to play for all of us. And we will continue working at the political end. We will continue working at the education end. Only two things I would say, which I said before to Congressman Judy Chu, that the United States has, a couple of other pandemics. There's a gun pandemic that gets directly impacted when there are hate crimes in this country. And also mental health issues that are combining with racial issues and the easy accessibility of guns, Robinder. That is just a real dangerous cocktail that's happening in this country. And all those issues kind of need to be addressed at the same time. So I would conclude with that. I thank you really to all the fantastic panelists, and I hope that we'll have them back again. Robinder, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. And we also thank our organizing team, folks, Santino and Prasoon and other members of the US Impact and the Imagine India team, Dolly Kapoor, Vikram Chauhan, who helped us to put this show together. Thank you so much, folks, for joining the panel and the speakers, and of course, our audiences and your questions and your likes, which you put up. A recording of this programming would be put up on YouTube page of the US India Political Action Committee and also the Imagine India Institute. May I also mention that our next episode on 15th of May, we will be talking about the COVID situation and the COVID crisis in India, which is a major worry turning out for all of us. So that would be our next topic. So do join in for that session, which will be on 15th of May. Once again, I thank all our esteemed panelists who joined us. We also thank, of course, the two Congress members who joined us at the beginning of the session today with their views. That said, thank you once again from the US India Political Action Committee and the Imagine India Institute. The broadcast of the show ends now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.